Wuchang Fallen Feathers is a video game that came out last year. It had a straight up pitiful release, but after some very important changes, this game is fantastic. What's going on, guys? It's Sean Islami, and Wuchang Fallen Feathers is a Souls-like game set in a dark fantasy version of China. You play as Wuchang, a renowned swordsman and pirate who is suffering from amnesia and a strange disease that has to do with feathers. It has all the things you'd expect from a Souls-like. Difficulty, environmental storytelling, cryptic and confusing quests, you know, the whole 9 yards. Now, the conversation around Wuchang Fallen Feathers when it came out was a lot about Souls-like fatigue. There was a lot of Souls games in 2025, so people were getting a little fed up. But from my perspective, it really felt extremely forced, like this was a talking point people knew would get clicks. And the whole thing was really stupid. I mean, who cares? More the better. But the game also did itself absolutely zero favors in a few different ways. The PC version of this game was just dreadful on release. The game was basically unplayable for most PC players, and while it's pretty disgraceful how often that happens with games now, this one seemed especially bad. Now, I've only joined the Master Race in the last few months. I can't speak for myself because last year I was on Xbox and the Wuchang was free on Game Pass. The game's graphics were absolutely beautiful and it was perfectly fine on there, but I did drop the game in frustration extremely quickly. The reason being was the baffling decision to not give your player invincibility frames when you were knocked down. But if you didn't know, in every other Souls game ever made, you could roll to get back up after being knocked down, which you wouldn't take damage during, and you could get back on your feet pretty easily. Not having that in Wuchang meant getting knocked on your ass was basically a one-way ticket to a respawn screen. Especially against bosses, it was just awful. I already suck enough at these games, so for me personally, I dropped it thinking maybe I'll play it another time. A few patches later, the game got hit with a ton of changes to the game's story, which basically amounted to censorship. With that on top of everything else at this point, I don't think most people who dropped it came back to it. The only reason I did was because I'm trying to grow my YouTube channel covering Souls-like games that you're currently watching. Subscribe if you do like this video, by the way. I went into this fully expecting this to be a drag in a game I was going to end up trashing on here, but that is not what happened. Being on PC now, the game is breathtaking to look at, and at some point, they did patch in having invincibility frames when you're knocked down. They also added in the ability to spawn right back at the boss's fog wall if you did die. And the runbacks were very brutal, so this was a welcome change. As for the censorship patch, because I didn't play the game in its original state, I don't have any strong feelings on it. I wish I did, but I just don't have an opinion. If you do, definitely leave a comment telling me what you think, but I just can't really comment on it. So the combat changes with the invincibility frames when you're knocked down, as well as being able to respawn right at the fog wall for bosses, may sound minor, but they were total game changers. If you know the Souls-like genre like I do, you probably see all the credit Lords of the Fallen 2023 gets for fixing their game, but I never see this mentioned with the Wuchang, and I think more people need to go back to it and experience it with these new changes. So they turned what was quite possibly a bad game into an extremely good one. I'll say just how good I think it is when I give my final verdict at the end. But for now, let's break down what it does so well and the strengths of Wuchang Fallen Feathers. I already touched on graphics, but I do want to reiterate, these levels are gorgeous and just great looking across the board. They knocked graphics and the game's entire presentation out of the park. There's some great looking areas, and the Avian Marsh in particular is probably one of my favorite looking areas I've seen in a game recently. I have nothing but good things to say here. I also have a lot of good things to say about this game's combat. Instead of a traditional leveling system, you get skill trees that are tied to the different weapons. A lot of the things that can be chosen in the skill tree are leveling up your stats like strength or agility, for example, but this is also where you can unlock new skills and passive abilities to tweak your playstyle a bit. I'm not sure where most people landed on this, but I think it's a point in Wuchang's favor. At the very least, they tried something different with the combat than what you usually see in these sorts of games. You're going to need these skills for the boss fights because they are tough. When Wuchang Fallen Feathers came out, you would have to make your way back to the boss after every death, like I said earlier. And I'll touch on the level design in a second, but the runbacks were brutal. Thankfully, a patch at some point added the option to re-challenge the boss, so if you die, you could spawn right outside. And thank God games are doing this now. There was never anything fun about brutal runbacks to bosses. I just don't understand why it took everyone so long to figure that out. I think it started with Stakes of America and Elden Ring. Anyway, I have a lot of thoughts about this boss roster, and I will have a boss ranking out soon, so definitely stay tuned, but this is something I've seen people say is a major weakness of the game. If you played on release when the knockdown issue was a thing, along with the runbacks, then that's totally valid. You'll get no argument from me. But if that's your reason now, you just haven't gotten very far in this game, in my opinion, because all of the bad boss fights are in the very beginning. The first few bosses are easy and you'll probably kill most within a few tries. Souls-like games are known for having skill check bosses, which are usually an early game boss that's going to be a major wall and cause you to get good. They're usually the second or third boss. But Wuchang is a little weird with this. Wuchang Fallen Feather's skill check boss is Commander Hong Lang, and not only is she much later in the game as the 8th boss you fight, she is absurd compared to everything else that you've been steamrolling so far. It's such a difficulty spike that it's honestly pretty bullshit, but that's a story for the boss ranking. That aside, my point is, the boss roster is actually something I think is one of Wuchang's biggest strengths now. From the commander on, these bosses are almost all fantastic across the board. And look, I'm not an expert in game design. There are other YouTubers who have insane knowledge about combo trees and logic chains for bosses. But for me, I just want a badass boss fight with great presentation of visuals with fun mechanics. So if you're like that and go by vibes over analysis, I promise you, you will love these boss fights. So if the boss fights are great, how are the levels? I mentioned they look amazing, but I'm going to have to give Wuchang once again high marks here. This isn't exactly a hot take though either. Even though people were conflicted on Wuchang as a game when it came out, people were comparing the level design to Dark Souls 1 and saying it's the best we've seen since then. There's probably some Souls-likes with better level design, but regardless, this is without a doubt another great aspect of Wuchang Fallen Feathers. The enemy variety in each level is great, and you have a lot of those branching paths where you find your way back at the previous checkpoint. One issue I found was some surprise traps or say, enemies pushing you off a ledge to your death that were just kind of ridiculous, like there was no way you would know that was coming unless you already died to it once already. There are two in particular that I'm not going to show because if I had to just cry my eyes out, shit my pants, and throw up everywhere when I was right before a checkpoint and got surprise killed, you're gonna have to deal with it too. Outside of this though, levels were amazing. So all of that is great, but what does Wuchang get wrong? Guys, I have had enough. These quests have got to go. We need to move on from these cryptic-ass quests. Wuchang is brutal with this. Certain dialogue options will lock you out of quests irreversibly. Straight up. When the game asks you to choose an option in its dialogue, Google it. Save yourself potentially hours upon hours of frustration. This needs to go. Even if Wuchang isn't the only game doing this, it's one of the worst examples of it I've ever seen. This review is of a year-old game, but I don't want to spoil that stuff for you in case you do care about the story. But yeah, the story wasn't great either. You have a disease that causes you to grow feathers and it's a plague killing the population. Wuchang is trying to find out what happened and how to stop it while suffering from amnesia and wondering how she got to where she is. I couldn't find myself getting invested in the story here, and I also don't feel any sort of way about any of the NPCs or characters. None of them I felt very attached to. I compared it to a game like First Berserker Kazan, which was another great game, but had a very poor story, I thought, but I did find myself caring about certain characters. But with Wuchang, I didn't even have that. It was just background noise. So clearly, playing through the game a year late gave me a much better experience than people who played it on release. I'm very partial to playing in these dark fantasy worlds when they look this good as well. The boss roster and level design are two of the most important things for a Souls-like to nail, and Wuchang did just that. I would have liked a bit more weapon types or something along those lines, but the skill trees worked well with the combat system. In this series, my scale is as follows: skip it, worth your time, must play, and essential. There is no doubt in my mind that this game is essential. Out of the Souls-likes I've played, so not anything made by From Software, this is now in rarefied air along with Lies of P as the best the genre has to offer. But that's just my thoughts. Most people had a very different experience than I did playing a year ago, but I genuinely think in its current state, Wuchang Fallen Feathers is just that good. Please consider liking this video and subscribing for my future content if you did enjoy this video and review, but I love you guys. I'll see you in the next one, and stay tuned for the boss ranking. If it's out, it's on the screen now. But it might not be yet.